Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more good than bad. I mean, the few bad things, which I'm like, I think they're sort of contingent bad things, but, you know, I'll give voice to them. I think people have every right to be concerned about privacy, both for in the consumer space or the political space. And I think, you know, it's good that if people are going to be aware of what information exists about them and be skeptical of the motives of people for collecting it and selling it on. And to the extent that you know, information that was initially gathered from the world outside politics is being used for politics, to be, you know, sort of skeptical of that. And then the other fear, which comes along, I think, with a inaccurate representation of what micro-targeting really is and how it is used, is there is some fear, which is reasonable, that candidates would use it to have a different conversation with every single person in the room because I know, you know, that each of you care most about some totally picayune niche issue, and now I can just communicate with you on that. And campaigns are no longer about, you know, big, broad, inspiring, thematic, unifying things, but are about lots of people being told issues of really parochial interest. This, and sometimes, you know, theoretically being told totally dissonant or conflicting things that represent a candidate as being on different sides of an issue because they think that I can tell 10,000 people I'm pro-choice and 10,000 people I'm pro-life, and they'll, you know, I'm doing it in the mail or doing it with target web ads, and they'll never know. This very rarely happens, mostly because most elections, voters tend to care about the 2 or 3 or 4 same things. You know, you don't have to look too closely at polls now to realize that, you know, it's like 60% of people are saying that jobs or the economy or however they're defining it are their most important concern. And so I can micro-target the hell out of this room, and I'd still realize that probably 3 out of 5 of you would want to hear something about what I'm going to do for job creation. So, so I think that's a reasonable fear. It just doesn't really bear out in practice. The good stuff is, one, all of this data, which we didn't talk a whole lot about, but which allows the campaigns to come up with an individual level prediction of your likelihood of voting for their candidate, of having a certain position on an issue, is all in the service of them wanting to know more about you so that they can meaningfully interact with you on the stuff you care about. Campaigns were always trying to persuade you in potentially manipulative ways, but they just had to do it when they did it through mass media. They were so risk averse because the fear of alienating somebody by being specific enough on an issue that people could disagree on was so great that they just wouldn't talk about them. So you had, you know, like just really, it was really hard for candidates to go positive on controversial issues. And so either they would go like gauzy, generic, like, you know, no possible offense could be taken on it, or they would go really negative because that stuff actually does work pretty well universally, and the people you alienate are people you want to alienate, right? And so now I think campaigns can, having a sort of more granular understanding of who you are and what you care about, meaningfully interact with you on the issues of your concern. You are no longer trapped in the geographical lines or large demographic categories that campaigns had to use to target you through the 90s because most of what they knew about you was how the precinct you lived in voted, or the information on your voter registration record, which is like your age and your gender and where you lived. And now they can find 3 people on a block that they want to mobilize. They can find 4 people on the block that they want to persuade. And it doesn't matter if you are a Republican in a Democratic fortress precinct or vice versa. Campaigns can see you as part of their plans because they can individually pinpoint you, and they can go out and through individualized voter contact, mail, phone calls, door knocks, web ads, start to have a real conversation. And so that's encouraging, and I find that all the stuff that's come out of these psychological experiments have developed just a more honest, nuanced understanding of how campaigns can engage people to do something that they aren't inclined to do otherwise. And we tend to ask this question always the wrong way, which is, why are there so many people who don't vote? Like, well, the better question is, why are there so many people who do vote? Like, most of the time your vote doesn't matter. You know, I apologize, it's an unromantic thing to say, but like, it's like, you know, political scientists have had a lot of trouble for a long time explaining why 55, 60% of people do vote. And every explanation they've had until these experiments came along bore no relation to the reality that any of us have when we wake up on that Tuesday, or I guess you're in an early vote state, when you wake up any day before that Tuesday and have the opportunity to decide whether I want to, you know, drive somewhere and wait online for half an hour to do this. And so, you know, these long equations that political scientists have come up with that assumes that the moment you wake up on that day, you're deciding the likelihood that you're going to be the pivotal and decisive vote in a choice in which like 100 million other people are also making their own calculations, times the possible material benefits that would accrue to you if the side that you vote for wins and there's a change in power and they're able to implement their agenda. Like, that's insane, right? And yet people voted anyway. And what we're starting to realize through these experiments that on the margins are changing people's likelihood of voting through these very small behavioral interventions is that people are voting because there are social benefits to voting. They want to see themselves as a voter. They don't want to be judged by their peers as not being a voter. And I think there's a desire to read that as manipulative or cynical. Frankly, it's an honest understanding of the human brain, and it manages to connect with people and extend to them benefits of voting that they weren't experiencing otherwise. And if those benefits are a desire to fit in or feel good about yourself, like, great. Like, to me, that seems like a perfectly good use for the political profession. And so, you know, I think there's this desire to look at modern campaigns and say that, like, they are superficial and they don't respect the intelligence of voters and they don't in any way help to build meaningful agendas for governing. And like, all these things are true. And we should blame the candidates and we should blame the media and we should blame the candidates for being risk averse and cynical and bad. And we should blame the media for not challenging them in reasonable ways, and we should blame voters for being dumb and consuming the worst types of political media about races. But I find like a desire to blame the mechanics is a total cop-out. You know, our campaigns were really silly decades before micro-targeting experiments, and it's a deferral of blame that each of us saddle in some way or another for the quality of our campaigns to pretend that like the computers did it.